Welcome to Keeping It Realty.
Welcome back to Keeping It Realty. I'm your host, Martha Smith.
And I'm your co-host, Natalia Perintoni. So today we have a very special guest in the house who's bringing a little Wild West flair to commercial real estate.
That's right. He's closing deals and kicking up dust. Let's give it up for Yae Colon, the Commercial Cowboy. Yeah!
Alrighty, yes. Where did you leave your horse? Special parking outside or
It's
what?
right in the corner.
Got it. Awesome.
It was a little hungry, so.
Hey, Jay, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So obviously, as you guys know, I've been in commercial real estate for a little bit over 4 years now. Love it. I've been in the commercial side of things for quite some time, so I do have an extensive background when it comes to commercial and sales.
Okay.
Okay, so we're dying to know what's with the cowboy hat.
Well, the situation with the cowboy hat, I always kind of like the fit, the look. But, I'm from Puerto Rico, so, you don't see that very often, especially having your background with the salsa, some reggaeton, so it's a little bit different, but, I've been living in the outer skirts of Tampa Bay, actually in Waimama, where there's a lot of, country.
Ranch and
so
got it.
Kind of like the look, honestly. I wanted to do something a little bit different. I'm always changing outfits and stuff like that. So
It's unique.
I'll try it.
Yeah.
Listen, I love it.
Me too.
Should we?
Yeah.
What?
Come on.
What's going on here?
We got a little
Whoa.
We got our own cowboy hat.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to rock ours too.
Now we can start the show.
Let's do it.
All right. What's the biggest misconception about commercial real estate?
I feel like a lot of times people think that, your average person thinks that, doing a commercial investment is impossible. It's only for people that are, that have
Rich,
money or
wealthy.
wealthy. So, I think anyone that has a dream to maybe own a commercial property, anybody can do it. There's so many options out there. And I just believe that that's the biggest misconception, right now.
Got it. And so
Thank
what's the first step for someone who is interested in having a real estate?
I would say, the very first thing that you should do, consult a commercial expert like myself.
Right.
That's something that is needed, for your knowledge. When it comes to your first time, doing commercial, whether you're leasing or purchasing, I think you should always consult a commercial expert, a local expert like myself.
Yeah. That understands the market too, right?
Absolutely.
He's out there working.
Right. Thank you for that. Let's talk about what are the steps to lease a commercial space.
Sure. So when it comes to commercial tenancy representation, I think the biggest thing that you should do as a business owner, starting up a new business, the first thing you need to do is register your business. You got to decide what kind of business you're going to do, right? Once you have that in mind and you're set on that, I think the biggest thing is register your business, whether it's, LLC, corporation, whatever it is, right?
Right.
The second thing you should do is put a business proposal together, a plan of action. Why? Because you need to do step by step. It's just not going to be, okay, I woke up one day, I want to build a restaurant. Next thing you know, I'm going to find a commercial location to lease. And that is the biggest mistake that anyone can do, when it comes to leasing a commercial space. And the second thing is open up a business account, right? Because you need to have funds in there. So you need to fund the business. If you're going to start up a business from home, then obviously do your credentials, do your bank account, start funding that bank account, start putting money in there. And obviously at some point when you have enough built up in there in that bank account, then you can start looking. And if you need the commercial space, then consult a real estate expert, in the commercial side of things. So that way you can start looking and see what your options are. And if you need a little bit more time, then you'll know because that person, the expert, is going to let you know.
Perfect.
So what's your favorite property type?
I specialize in land and development. That's my specialty. However, I do tenant representation. I do commercial sales as far as, land sales or building sales, or representation of buyers as well too.
Okay. Jay, when you're working with people, what type of loans are there available for all these types of commercial deals?
That's a great question. However, there's many different loans. There's over 4, loans here in the state of Florida that are used. However, the ones that are most common out there is your SBA loan, your traditional loan, and then you also have a bridge loan as well too. But there's this one favorite loan that I kind of like. It's kind of like a private lending. It's called your CLTV. It's basically commercial loan to value, and what it is basically they don't pull your credit report. They don't require tax returns either, and you can actually close this deal within 3 weeks.
Wow!
And it's just a matter of it all depends on the value of that property, and obviously they might require a 30% down payment or a 20% down payment, but the bank will always loan you 70%.
Right.
Yeah, and this is why it's important to work with a professional that knows what they're doing, that could guide you to what the right loans are, So
and
thank you for sharing them.
Can we talk about market and property research? So what should buyers research before making a big move?
I will say, once you consult that commercial expert, I think the next step will be, what's your budget, right? And then from there, go on, because you can have a dream of purchasing a commercial building of $1 million or $2 million, but your budget really is $200,000. So
reality.
Yeah, the reality, right? So you gotta make sure that you understand what the rates are, what the market is looking like, and at that moment, then move ahead according to your budget.
Right.
Okay. What are the biggest deal breakers in a commercial?
It depends on what you're doing. If you're asking me, okay, if I'm purchasing a commercial property, and that commercial property sits on a 1 acre lot, for example, let's just say the building is really old. As a commercial expert, my due diligence will be during that due diligence period. I would check for zoning, permits. If there's zoning, any kind of zoning changes that can be done. I will say, even cost repairs of the building. There's a lot of times where the building is so old and you have to do a lot of repairs into that building. So those are many deal breakers. What can you do in that particular property? If you're wanting to build something else, for example.
Okay, let's talk about offers and negotiations a little bit.
Sure.
How does a buyer lock in a deal?
Well, it's pretty simple. When it comes to locking a deal, it's kind of like, first of all, you have to look at the market. I got to run comps for the buyer or that person, right? And what you do is in that process of the, in the beginning steps of that purchasing process, it's not first, okay, I want to go ahead and put an offer of the listing, whatever the listing price is asking. No, I think my biggest thing is, okay, what is this building's, worth? And then after that, all right, well, let's go ahead and leave some space to negotiate as well too, but at the same time trying to get the best deal for your pocket. And that's the biggest thing, when it comes to locking a deal, and also making sure that everything is aligned. If you might be purchasing a building that have leases in place, what are those? What are you making at a profit? In those leases.
Right? Is it a smart investment for your client?
The numbers have to make sense.
Correct.
Sure.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that's the correct word. The numbers, they always have to make sense. That at the end of the day, it's got to be, it's got to make sense for your client.
So speaking of offers, right?
Sure.
So what do you recommend for your clients? Do you usually do like a low ball offer, or you go strong? So what's...
I hate low ballers. I really do.
Yeah.
And to be quite honest, working with investors is, you got to have a passion for that, right?
Yeah.
And especially when I list properties, I don't entertain those low ball offers,
Right.
So me as a representative of the buyer, I like to, like I said, run my comps, make sure that, we're in line with the list price. And at that moment, I will say, look, we can work this around. If you want to go lower on the offer, let's look at your pros and cons. Is it in a good location? Because just because you want to purchase a commercial building, it might not suit you for your needs. And you can turn around and make it the way you want it. However, it's got to have the right location. It's got to make profit for you at the end of the day. So lowballing is not always the best route, because you can also insult the seller as well too.
Right.
And
it won't take you serious at all either, right?
Yeah.
Strong.
What is the due diligence like in a commercial deal?
It all depends what you're purchasing. Due diligence period can be 30 days. It could be 60 days. It could be 180 days. It all depends on what the deal is. It all depends on the type of homework that you're doing.
Right. So like in a land deal, you would have a different due diligence than if you were looking at maybe like an industrial building.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
And during that period of time, you actually take a look at land surveys, zoning. You can also check on your leases if there's any. You can do, for example, a lot of people don't know this. In fact, when it comes to purchasing a lot, you have to do a soil test.
Ooh.
And that's very important. A lot of times when you're purchasing an old gas station, for example, you want to convert it into a automotive repair shop, for example, you want to make sure that there's no gas tanks or any tanks underneath on the ground. So you want to make sure that all that, but the person prior to you, the seller might not know that. So what do you have to do? You have to go back to the county department or the zoning department, or get an inspector that can determine whether there's existing tanks on the ground.
And so if there is tanks, just curious, what happens? Is it really expensive?
That could be a deal breaker.
Yeah, it's a deal breaker.
That could be a deal breaker,
because it's not going to work for that type of client.
Now you have to, as a buyer, you purchase the property, but then now you have to spend money in removing those tanks.
Yeah.
If you need to.
Yeah, it's very important to use a professional, guys, to look at things like this. It can save you a lot of money in the long run. I know that.
And actually, I think this is why real estate agents either do residential or commercial, right? Because even in commercial, you have so many things that you need to be an expert at.
Good
just
point.
resident.
It's just commercial is so broad. There's so many different, I call it departments, but there's so many different kinds of commercial deals, and, you can't be a mechanic and at the same time be an accountant. It's just,
correct.
It doesn't go
special
with.
got it.
Right.
So what if somebody wants to lease instead of buy? Can you walk us through that process?
Sure. First of all, why will you lease instead of purchasing when you can purchase? Or is it that you can't purchase?
Or let's say that somebody wants to lease because they're not sure where their business is headed maybe, or maybe they want to try this area out before they buy. That's
a good point, and I personally recommend that as well too. Because at the end of the day, you have, if it's a startup business, you want to make sure your business is going to do well, and I totally recommend that. That's not a bad deal. However, if you are going to lease, have in mind always that your business always, is going to grow, right? And you have to have that mentality. If you're going to go into business and you don't know if it's going to do good or not, that's not the right mentality.
Right.
If you're going to go into business, always think positive, think ahead. I'm going to grow this business, and in 2 years, I'm going to purchase a property.
I love that.
What type of leases are there?
Sure, there's many leases out there. However, there's 3 very common ones here in the state of Florida.
Got it. Okay.
You have to triple net lease. On a triple net lease, basically the tenant pays the base rent plus all the operating costs, okay, for that property. Then you have your gross lease, where the landlord pays the operating expenses, but the tenant only pays the base rent. And then you have your percentage lease. That one, a lot of people don't like, but that's you usually see that on retail spaces, inside the malls as well too, where basically a tenant pays the base rent plus a percentage of their gross sales. And that could be 3%, it could be 5%. But if you have a commercial expert like myself, we can always negotiate that. Okay. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Good to know.
Okay, so can we talk about letters of intent and lease terms?
Sure.
So what is an LOI?
Sure. An LOI is a letter of intent.
Okay.
Basically this is the way I put it. It's kind of like a formal email, a formal letter. I am coming to you with my client, with my buyer or my tenant. And I'm saying to you, Mr. Landlord, I am interested in leasing or purchasing your property. And these are the terms. I put terms, I put the credentials of my client. I also put the amount of the rent that I'm willing to pay, or that my client is willing to pay, with the triple net or gross lease, whatever lease is involved in it. And I also put, in this case, my compensation, right? Okay. And also in that letter of intent, what are your expectations from the landlord? Whether the landlord has to, upgrade the curb appeal of the building, whether the landlord has to paint the building, anything of that nature, you can put in that. It's kind of like an initiation. Hey, I am interested in a relationship with you as a landlord and as a
It's like an offer kind of thing?
Yeah.
Or not really?
It's
like a little different.
You're using the word intent.
It's kind of like a pre-offer, if you want to put it that way.
Is there any deposit in there?
No
it's
deposit
completely
whatsoever.
different. Okay.
You can actually, it's like a pre-negotiation of what you're intending to do.
Got it. Okay.
But once you, in a purchasing aspect, once you pass your due diligence period, then you go into a formal offer at that moment. And then you have to write a formal offer. And then obviously after your findings during the due diligence period, then you put different terms into it. You negotiate a little bit more, and then it's more like it's actually an actual offer.
Wow.
So, and then if you're leasing, you can actually negotiate the lease terms and all that in there at the time. But once you get into, once you're done with the negotiation, then at that moment you enter into a lease agreement.
Okay, well, very good information, Jay. Wow. We really appreciate you talking to us about commercial. It was really fun. But are you ready to play a game, Cowboy?
I'm always ready.
All right, awesome. Well, this one is called Real Talk Rapid Fire.
Sure.
Okay, and you're going to say the first thing that comes to mind.
Oh, of course.
All right, Natalia, you want to start?
Absolutely. Okay, so open house or brokers open?
Brokers open.
Land or industrial space?
Land.
Text or call?
Call. Always call.
Do you prefer to work with men or women?
Both.
Okay, good answer.
Horse or donkey?
Horse.
Cowboy hat or boots?
Both.
What's your superpower?
Negotiations.
Ooh.
I'm the best.
I love that. Okay, if you weren't in real estate, what would you be doing?
I have a passion for two things. I always liked the military. In fact, my son, he just went into the military, but I've been interested in MMA fighting. It's funny, but it's true.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Okay.
Don't get on
so are we
his
going to see you
wrong
in
side.
MMA in a couple of years?
No, I don't think so. I'm too old for that now.
That was fun. Thank you so much for the information. I hope that you guys found this useful. Before we go, how can our listeners get in touch with you?
Sure, absolutely. So you can always find me on Instagram, Tampa Commercial Properties, and you can message me, DM me through there. And remember, my name is Yae Colon, and I am a commercial expert. Yeehaw!
Wow. And don't forget, if you're interested in commercial real estate or need any help, please let us know. You can always email us at keepingitrealty@gmail.com.
See you next time on Keeping It Realty.
Thank you all for tuning into our podcast. And I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as we did.
Don't forget to follow us on social media at keepingitreal_T and share this episode with all your friends.
If you guys have any questions and topics that you guys would like for us for future episodes, let us know. Shoot us a message. We would love to hear from you guys.
See you next time on Keeping It Realty.